Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of I am so getting flamed for this. So I know you guys pretty much know me for having pretty positive reviews on games I played because I have always thought that there is an oversaturation of negativity in the YouTube sphere, the gaming sphere, and the everything sphere. But today I actually wanted to talk about one game I actually didn't like that much because it's a bit of a contentious topic and I really just kind of wanted to share my opinion on this. After the surprising success of my Xenoblade 2 video, where I was very positive towards that game, I noticed people seemed to really like it, and I thought, well, why not do another hot take on the Xenoblade series, you know? And just an important disclaimer, these opinions are mine and mine alone, and it is totally okay if you don't agree with them. It's just how I feel. It's not to say the game is necessarily good or bad, or that you should think it's good or bad, and I'm not trying to say it's wrong if you like a game I don't like, or you don't like a game that I like. It's totally okay. I just asked you to be respectful of my opinions and please feel free to share yours. Okay, so as you know, a couple of months ago, I did a video about Xenoblade 2, which we all know gets a lot of flack online, and I personally felt I got that flack kind of unfairly, so I wanted to make a video talking about all the things I liked about the game, because I feel like people don't really talk about those as much when there's just so much to exploit by talking about the game in a negative manner. And in the comments, people were also asking my opinions about the other two games in the trilogy, and a couple people found out that I actually wasn't the biggest fan of one of them, and of course they wanted to know why. So, I let it slip that I didn't like 3, and this obviously surprised some people, so I kind of wanted to explain myself a bit. I really wanted to talk about what in particular I didn't like about 3, despite the fact that I really liked 1 and 2. And so for fairness sake, when I was coming up with the script outline for this, I copy and pasted my Xenoblade 2 outline, so that way I make it as fair as a comparison as possible by talking only about the same criteria that I used to judge what I liked about Xenoblade 2. And again, just as a reminder that just because I don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. Like, objectively, I think 3 is a better made game than 2, but I enjoyed 2 a lot more than I liked 3. Okay, so let's just get into it. As you may know, Xenoblade 3 was released in 2022. It was announced the previous February, where it was introduced to a lot of hype as it was, I believe, the final thing announced in the February Nintendo Direct, and I think everybody was super duper excited for it. And I'm pretty sure it was released because of the shocking success of Xenoblade 2. Whether or not you like this game, I think we can all agree it was a very surprising success, and is the highest sold game of the trilogy and also the entire Xeno series, with I believe 4 million copies sold at the last check, but I'm pretty sure that number's probably gotten higher since it's not super up to date. But what I'm trying to say is big numbers. So I got the game day 1, and during that summer, I sank a lot of time into it because, like I said, I was just really excited. Like, I liked 1, I loved 2, and so given that they were kind of presenting 3 as like, not just the final game in the trilogy, but also like, 1 and 2 combined, I was like, how can this not be anything but perfect? And so I sank so much time into it because I thought it was going to be amazing, and I kept waiting and waiting for me to fall in love in it, like I thought I would, because of course I would. And it just like never happened. Like, it got to the point where by chapter 3 or 4 it started feeling like a chore to play, and so I stuck it out till I knew I needed to play till at least chapter 6, because everybody and their mother talks about chapter 6. Oh my god, that scene. Okay, so I was like, of course I want to see what that is. Like, maybe it'll be something so awesome that it'll be like, okay, well now I'm dying to keep playing to find out what happens in the end. I got to it, and it was okay. Like, when you're not really emotionally attached to the characters, like, it's really hard to like deeply care about what's going on. And so after I got to that scene and I just thought it was okay, I was kind of like, okay, I'm not sure this is a good use of my time anymore. And I know what you're thinking, right? Like, how dare she say she's a fan of this series when she dropped one of the games before completion? I know, I'm sorry, let me explain myself. Okay, so one of the biggest things to me was the characters. This cast just lacked all the charm that 2's cast had, and just like the iconicness that 1's cast had, and it was just a struggle the whole way through to really care about what was happening to them. To me, all of them felt like super duper dry, and I just could could not for the life of me connect to them, like, at all. Like, I don't think there were really any memorable side characters in this one, and Uni was kind of the only one who I thought was genuinely kind of entertaining, but aside from that, they just felt like... If I say Pokemon characters, I think you'll understand I kind of mean that as an insult, right? Because Pokemon characters are not exactly known for their fleshed out, colorful personalities. My big thing with them was the lack of group dynamics. It felt like a group, just like thrown together. And it just felt like there were no good dynamics between them, and they lacked the entertainment factor that the other two ones had. Like, it felt like a group you choose for your class project. Like, just a bunch of people randomly thrown together, trying to get along, and it just lacked all of the cohesiveness and charm and entertainment that, like, the other cast had, which made it so enjoyable. Because for the Xenoblade games, I feel like the cast really makes the game, and, like, the characters are just such a huge component of everything going on that, like, yes, I mean, we all talk about how its big standout is the world, but of course, like, if the characters suck, and it's really hard to vibe with them, then, like, it's gonna be really hard to want to keep going, because, like, then you just don't care. Like, I hate to use this word, but I'm gonna use it. They really felt vanilla. They felt very, very vanilla and bland. Like, not A tier with Shen in this game, because I genuinely did not care what happened to them anymore, and I felt so bad because I wanted to care, but I couldn't, like, cry. I couldn't get invested in them because they were just so boring. I think what happened, well, much like a lot of the stuff in the game, I think what happened with the cast is they tried to tone it down from 2's very out there, interesting cast, and what ended up happening is they went too far and they toned it down too much, and in the process they made them way too boring and way too safe, if that kind of makes sense. They feel very, very safe. It just felt like they were like, these are good guys. That's their personality. They're the good guys, they're the protagonists, that is their personality. And it's really hard to care about them, where it feels like they just made a cast of characters, they made them the good guys, and then they maybe gave them like one trait each. And that was their defining personality feature. And it's just not very good. Okay, so for the voice acting, I'm sure some of you know this is where I had a lot to say about the last one, and that was not entirely positive, for the record. But I really don't have much to say about this cast. I mean, they're fine. they're good enough. They're fine. I mean, I really don't have much to say about it. I thought it was better than 2's, so we can give it 1 point there for being better than 2, but they were fine. Not much else to say. Okay, so let's move right on along to environments. This is a major complaint for me. Xenoblade is known for its amazing environments, right? So tell me why the environments in this game are so freaking awful. Like, they are genuinely so empty and so boring, it feels like a crime. Like, I'm sorry, what happened to the sense of, like, openness and wanderlust and these gorgeous environments that the other games were all known for? They have been replaced with husks that are almost as soulless as the husks in the game. It is sad. It just feels so untrue to the game. It felt like Pokemon collaborated with Monolith Soft to try to make better environments for the Pokemon games, and this was the result, and it made me very, very sad. I mean, the eagerness to explore them is just completely gone because they are so boring. There's absolutely no intrinsic motivation to want to explore them. They are, in an essence, ridiculously boring. And maybe I wouldn't mind so much if it wasn't for the fact they really sold that they were combining the worlds of 1 and 2 together. Oh, it makes 3. That's so cute. Yeah, they were combining the 2 of them, and then you take these iconic locations, put them together, and what do you get? It's terrible. It's so bad. Like, it genuinely feels disrespectful to the environments of their predecessors and their creativity and just everything gorgeous about them, because these suck. Like, I remember the names of maybe 2 environments in this entire game. And one of them is a city, because its name is just the city. It was a little sad, don't you think? I mean, the colonies are drab. The environments are so pitifully uninspiring, it hurts. And the biggest crime, in my opinion, is the fact that they took two of their best ideas from the previous game, Machna and Moritha, and combine them together in an unholy fusion that should have been amazing if they followed in line with the past two games, but it ended up so bad and so boring. It almost hurt me to see that this is what became of this gorgeous area from the first game and this super interesting idea from the second one, and they put them together and it just sucked. Like, my heart was crushed when I got to this place because I was really holding out hope throughout the environments of this game that Moritha would show back up. This was how it did, and it was literally just like so terrible. And I'm gonna move on, but this was one of easily the most disappointing parts of the entire game to me. And the story, oh boy, I hope you got your popcorn because this is going to be as long as Avengers Endgame. The story is truly a paradox where they take a very interesting sounding concept that was actually presented right in the trailer, and it's expanded into something that's so mind-boggling confusing that it somehow loops back to being boring because you're just so lost. Like, okay, let me explain. The concept of soldiers who only have 10 years to live and all they do is fight each other. It's a really interesting concept, and like, I'm currently watching Fallout, and like, in a way it kind of reminds me of the Brotherhood a bit and the Wastelands, and I think that's a really interesting idea. So I thought that was a super cool thing, and I thought it was cool too when I heard about it in the trailer, because obviously I was like, okay, this is definitely going to make for a really interesting story. So why didn't it make for a very interesting story? I don't know. But the problem with this is that even though they have this interesting concept, they also want this game to be the conclusion of a trilogy involving 1 and 2. And they didn't want to go all in on making this fully standalone or making this about 1 and 2. So instead what they did is they had an interesting concept, but then the second they start shoehorning stuff about 1 and 2 in, it instantly gets so unbelievably confusing, and it becomes so hard to follow along with it. And like, when it was getting to the point where I started having to Google the plot of like chapters I was currently going through, I started having a realization that this probably was not the best use of my singular hour of gaming a day. And listen, I'm not stupid, okay? I have good like reading comprehension. Like, please trust me. I'm like a straight A Dean's List student in college. But this one was just, I could not follow along. And when I started having to spend time on the friggin' Xenoblade wiki, trying to figure out what was going on in what I was actually currently playing, I was just like, I don't want to be spoon-fed stuff, but this is getting a bit ridiculous, you know? I mean, it's such a good concept, but then what happens is it becomes so murky the second they start throwing stuff about 1 and 2 in, because you have all this crap about worlds colliding and origin and whatever. And I don't know if there was something involved in the Aegis. Bro, I don't even know. But even reading through the wiki page about the plot, it still made very, very little sense to me. And so eventually when I got to that point where I realized I was not even going to be able to understand the Wikipedia explanation of this, because it was just too much and too confusing, I just decided in my head this was a standalone game. Yeah, like, I low-key just, like, whenever I think about this game, I just try to pretend that only the stuff about the main cast existed and nothing to do with 1 and 2. Just like the main stuff about being trapped in a loop of, like, you know, the 10-year life cycles. It's better to think about it that way, honestly. Like, it literally makes no sense when you're playing, and I think it only got more confusing the more you progressed. And again, even when I looked up the ending and the explanation to try to like hope that somehow there was like a piece of the puzzle that made it all make sense, there really wasn't. And so that's it. It doesn't just kill interest. It's so dissatisfying when you have something that doesn't really feel like it has a resolution, because you never even fully understand like what the problem was in the first place. Anyway, it was a really intriguing concept, but it was completely butchered by the fact that they had to connect it to the end of 2. And now let's move on to the gameplay. Oh boy, this gameplay was not it. Sorry. Like, it felt to me like it veered very, very far back into Xenoblade 1's combat, which is probably good if you really like that style of combat. I like 2's a lot better, but even still, like, if this had just been like a straight 1-to-1 copy of 1's combat, I think I still would have found it, like, you know, enjoyable enough. Like, when I played through Xenoblade 1, I didn't like adore the combat, but like, you know, it was fine. Like, I was happy to engage with like all the monster things I saw. But they took that and they made it worse. And it got to the point where I'd actively be running away from monsters and stuff because I did not want to have to go into more battles, and I absolutely had to. I hated it. I mean, yeah, it was boring. I mean, Ouroboros was cool. I did like that, but that was really it. And the rewards for like finding stuff in the overworld were just so not it. Like, it felt like there was no real incentive to actually go around exploring every nook and cranny like I normally do. I'm sorry, there's a plane taking off right now. Because what ended up happening is that when the rewards suck so much that it feels like they're providing no real benefit to you in game, it's like, well, why do I want to spend all this time going around looking for them? Like, I may as well just like go where I have to go and then play through the main story instead. Like, the battle being boring was one thing, but when I didn't even enjoy exploring, which is the entire point of an open world game, because the rewards were useless, that was kind of a turnoff. Also, oh my god, the hero quests were so bad. Like, even the ones involving like mildly interesting characters or side plots, they were so freaking long that however interesting they could have been was completely ruined by the fact it never ended. And now, if you didn't think the other parts were sacrilegious enough, here's the part you're gonna hate me for, which is the music. This music sucks. Like, one of the biggest crimes this game commits is having not standout music. Like, that is what Xenoblade is known for. And this music isn't bad music, but it's generic music, and there is no standouts, like, almost at all, and it is a crime. Like, almost every single track from the first two games and their respective DLCs is like so good. You know how many were like actually decent from this game? I can count. It's not Counterattack. It's the one that's not Counterattack but is like Counterattack. It's that one. I don't remember its name, but not Engaging the Enemy. Oh my god. Whatever that one is, that one's good. There's, of course, the regular battle theme I think is really cool. And then Dana Desert, or whatever its name is, because now that I'm thinking about it, that might have actually been the name in Torna, but I don't know. I'm not kidding when I say this game was pretty forgettable. I don't remember what its name was, but whatever the Desert Wasteland music was, okay, that was really cool. That was different, and I really liked that one. That was the only good overworld theme in the entire massive game. Like, here's my thinking. If you wanted to make this about 1 and 2 colliding, and you want to make the overworlds a mixture of 1 and 2's areas, why not do the same with the music? Like, you had this iconic, incredible music, fuse it together, and think about how amazing it would be. Like, I've listened to fan-made mixtures of some of the songs from both games, and they are nothing short of incredible. Imagine how good they would have been if the composers from Xenoblade did that exact thing. But instead, I don't know how it happened where almost every single track ended up being entirely okay and forgettable. Okay, of course, there are other complaints, which why don't I just run through my laundry list of complaints, my airing of grievances. One of my biggest ones is that I was so excited to see how a fusion of 1 and 2 would play out. And I was honestly really disappointed when we got this, and it was not enjoyable at all for me. I mean, this was not the fusion that I think a lot of people were expecting, hence why when Future Redeemed came out, I feel like so many people unequivocally loved it, because I think that deep down, even though maybe people don't want to admit it, I think that's what a lot of people were kind of expecting from 3, the way Monolith Soft had worded it. And that's kind of why I didn't like Nia and Melia being there, because it made it feel like it was going to be a lot more interconnected than it actually was. And I think, like I said, I think that's why Future Redeemed got so much love. Everything from I saw about Future Redeemed was very, very positive. People really liked it, and I think I saw a lot of people kind of agreeing that that's what base game 3 should have probably been like. Truthfully, I felt like this game was built like a standalone game, honestly, and you know, it was very, very hard, because it felt like they knew they needed to end the trilogy somehow, right? But for whatever reason, I think because their thinking here was, Part of the reason why 2 was so popular was that you didn't need to play 1 to understand it. And so I think their thinking might have been, well, you can get more sales if you're not requiring people to play the previous 2 games first. And instead of that, it'll kind of be like Easter eggs, which I can understand. But then the problem is when you're trying to make it out like you're ending the whole trilogy and you're talking about how you're incorporating elements from the previous 2 games, it feels really weak, like they didn't want to go all in, and so it just feels very off. It feels like it should have been a standalone game, because it is, for the most part, a standalone story, but then they shoehorn the elements of 1 and 2 in, and it does not work. I mean, there is no jaw-dropping, gorgeous areas and music. There is no whimsy. There is no color. There is no fun. And it's such a departure from the previous 2 games. And I want to say that, like, I'm not under the expectation at all that all Xenoblade games should be like this. Because I am very aware that even though I haven't personally played them, the other Xeno series are not like this. But the problem is they set a precedent with the first 2 of a trilogy. And so to make the 3rd installment so drastically different, it just doesn't work. And I think 3 would have worked really well as a Xenoblade 4, either a standalone or a start to a new trilogy, because I really think they had a very interesting concept there, but I think they would have seriously benefited from isolating that story instead of shoehorning the other stuff in about freaking origin and whatever. That was so confusing. And making it its own standalone game, because I think a lot of people wanted a vibe shift for the next phase of Monolith Soft's games. And so I think this would have been a great game for a Xenoblade 4, but because it was a Xenoblade 3, it felt like a disappointment. It felt like such a departure from what the previous 2 games in the trilogy, the connected trilogy, were like, that it just did not work. So that's kind of my problem with it. For a game that's supposed to be the conclusion to 1 and 2, it feels like an entirely different series from 1 and 2. And, if you've played 1 and 2, those games are like, the vibe feels very similar, but the cast, the entire world, like everything about them is different, but yet they still have like a few common elements, like the freaking Nopon, but then they also have like very similar music. They have like not even similar looking environments, just very similar, the vibe similar, I guess. But if you played it, you know what I mean. But 3 is such a departure from that it doesn't even feel like it's the same series anymore. So it's not even the problem being it's a different cast and different stories and whatever. The problem is they entirely changed the formula. Again, I think that's why Future Redeemed was so popular with fans, because I think that's deep down really truly what people expected and what I think people kind of wanted to see. It felt like they tried really, really hard to adjust from the criticism of Xenoblade 2, that it veered so far into something that was such a far departure from the rest of the series. And it just no longer felt like the same thing. And it's hard because I'm a fan of the 2nd game. But I also know there's a lot of stuff to criticize. But I think people were too vocal with how they wanted to criticize it. And sometimes I can't help but the conspiracy theorist part of me says, I think they might have tried to overcorrect, and in doing so, unintentionally got rid of a lot of the things that people also loved about it, because it is like, the #1 seller. I'm not saying I wanted it to be like 2, because I liked 1 plenty, and it did not feel like either of them in a bad way. I was just really disappointed that I didn't love it, and it felt so different from the other 2 that I enjoyed so much. But of course, I'm not just going to be a hater. Let me talk about the few things I think it did better. Yeah. The things I think it did better. The dialogue's better written. It's not cringy, at least, so if you didn't like that, it's been fixed, so woohoo. The story did have a lot of promise at first. Unfortunately, didn't keep up with Steam, but it did have a lot of promise at first. Also, the graphics were an improvement. I think a lot of people agree the graphics did look better from 2. It's mostly the character models. The character models were a huge improvement. And I think that's about it. Now, of course, I can't talk about this without also mentioning how this is a massive source of debate within the Xenoblade community, because people love to pit stuff against each other. And so people always like to pit stuff against each other like it's a matter of you're a fan of this or you're a fan of this. And it can't be both. And if you hate this, then it's because you like this. And if you like this, it's because you hate this, and all that. And it's stupid. The reality is, I think the problem isn't it being a matter of 1 versus 2 versus 3, but that they just took such a drastically different path from the first 2 that I think it's really less of a question of which of these 3 do you think is better, and more of do you like this new direction they went in? If yes, then you probably loved it. If you didn't, then you probably, like me, felt a little bit disappointed that it felt like such a departure from the series you thought you were playing. Also, this might be a little bit of a rant, but I don't like when people say that if you don't like 3 and you like 2, it's because you're just such a big fan of everything about 2. And 2's a black sheep, and you should know that every single game is like 3, and like 2 is the exception, and like 3 is a return to the whole formula. Buddy, okay, I liked 1. I really did. I liked the DLCs for both. And so I don't think the reason why I don't like 3 is because I just love 2 so much. I really don't. And I'm still very excited for X Definitive Edition. Like, I don't think it's an issue of me loving this one thing and everybody's like, oh, that's not representative of the whole thing. I get it. But I also liked another game, which almost everybody agrees is really solid. So I don't think it's a matter of me being just such a huge fan of the second game that because this one's not like that, I don't like it. When 1 is not like it either, but I still really enjoyed it. I think it's just because 3 is a little bland. Like, for all the quirky charm that made people hate 2, it's also what made it so memorable and fun. And I argue even 1 had this too, like the Ricky volleyball scene, but for whatever reason, the charm, just the vibe of the charm, just completely gone from 3. And it felt like that unique charm is kind of what made Xenoblade Xenoblade. And without it, it just felt like just not even the same series anymore. It was just so serious and dull, and it lacked like the JRPG fantasy charm the previous 2 had. And again, I just want to say, I think this would have been great as a standalone Xenoblade 4, but as a Xenoblade 3, it just felt like a big letdown. So what do I hope Monolith Soft learned from this? I think crucially what they and everybody I hope took from this is that it's okay to want to do different stuff with your games. Just maybe don't do it in the 3rd game of a trilogy that's supposed to be a conclusion to the previous 2. A game can have serious undertones like 1 did and still not be overly depressing in its overworld and music and everything. I mean, most importantly, I think it's important for developers or anybody in the game industry, or truly any industry, to remember that not everything is always going to be everybody's cup of tea. And it's perfectly okay to take criticisms from stuff and use it to shape games going forward. But I think it's also important to remember that negative people are always the most vocal. And so you're going to hear that a lot more than you're going to hear praise. And it's also a lot more salient, and you're a lot more likely to remember the negative comments, even if they were fewer than the positive ones, because that's just how negativity is. It's salient and it sticks around in your brain. And I think it's important for them and everybody else to remember, why was this successful in the first place? 2 is the series bestseller, and 1 is considered on Wikipedia one of the greatest games of all time. And so even though you might hear a lot of criticism, I think it's important to remember that these games people are criticizing so hard, 1 is considered one of the best games ever, and the other one is your best-selling game. I mean, no matter how much people are criticizing, it can't be that bad if so many people bought it. So anyway, I really hope that those of you who were like in shock that I dislike this game to the point of dropping it can at least now kind of understand where I'm coming from, or at the very least understand my viewpoint on what I didn't like about it. Again, I'm not trying to convince anybody that this is a poorly made game, because it's not. And if you're going to start going after me saying, this is not a bad game, dude, I totally agree. It's not a bad game. It's just such a departure from the previous game that if you really love the formula of the last 2 and the vibe and everything about it, it's really hard not for some of us to feel a little bit disappointed about the new direction they took. You're always free to disagree if you prefer 3, but of course, I hope you'll just be respectful of my opinion and at least understand why I personally didn't like it. And I'm really not exaggerating. I was genuinely so excited for 3 that when I played it and I realized I just did not like it, I thought maybe I was like growing out of video games, because mind you, this happened like 22. It would have been like between some of my last years of high school. I thought maybe I was just growing out of video games, and it wasn't until I started playing Tears of the Kingdom that I remembered that I really liked playing video games, and I just didn't like this one. Anyway, feel free to tell me your thoughts on 3 below. Just please, again, be respectful because I don't want my comments to become a debate like frickin' Twitter community has. So please just be respectful, not just to me, but mostly towards other people. Because I feel like people have been pretty good about being respectful about my opinions, but not others. So please, 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 please be respectful. It's just an opinion on a game. But yeah, I am still so excited for Xenoblade X, and I'm definitely really thrilled that they are finally bringing it. I'm so excited to play it. I think everybody should look at picking it up because it is a huge, massive game, and even if the story isn't supposed to be as big as previous games, I'm still so excited. I can't wait to get back into it, and yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, see ya.